we've made it to the second week of this three-part online workshop. Thank you guys so much for showing up here in person, I guess, online to create community and also to spread resources and help each other out from across the globe, which is pretty cool. Okay, we run on donations. Of course, there's no pressure. This is not mandatory at all to attend this workshop. If you're interested in helping us create those physical resources in the future, or any kind of contribution is, of course, really appreciated and helpful. So no pressure. Just put the QR codes there for a moment, and then we will continue on to the workshop. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about go pay yourself. Go pay yourself. That's something that a lot of us as artists have kind of been tricked into thinking that we don't deserve, maybe, or that we're not worth that kind of conversation. So I want to help you have an understanding of how things work on the back end in terms of getting paid in the music industry, especially when it comes to live shows is the focus. I'm not really good at PR, label, that kind of end of stuff. So sorry, this is the wrong workshop for that. But if you want to know about booking yourself and how to pay yourself and make sure you get paid and how to negotiate a little bit, also how to make sure to calculate things, make sure you're not getting ripped off, all those things. So I hope that you'll leave this workshop feeling a little more secure in your ability to financially advocate for yourself. Again, I'm not an expert, a financial expert whatsoever. So please don't take this as like legal advice. It's just my opinion and things I've learned throughout the decade. Okay, we've already done a bit of an introduction. Getting paid is like the scariest part of being a musician, and sometimes having the money conversation, especially when it involves your art, is really hard. But I want to place this idea in your mind that you are also not just an artist and like a sensitive, creative soul, but you are also a small business owner. A lot of, oh, and Ben, if you wouldn't mind admitting, I think there's a few people in the waiting room. They're going to keep piling in for the next few minutes.
I actually don't have admit.
Oh,
Permit.
no. Okay. We should fix that.
Sorry.
We should fix that. Hold on. Okay, maybe I'll figure how to do that. Sorry, guys. I'm really bad at make co-host. How about that? Okay, hopefully that'll work. I'm not the best at Zoom also. Don't take advice from me about that. Okay, thank you everyone for waiting that was waiting in the waiting room. Apologies for that. So back to the introduction. I would like you guys to not only think of yourself as a sensitive, creative person that has to focus on art, which is really important, but these days artists also have to wear so many different hats, and unfortunately, that also means that you should also educate yourself on what kind of hat you need to wear. So that means that sometimes you have to think about your art, and I hate to phrase it this way. I wish I had a better way to phrase it, but sometimes you need to think about your art as a small business and your band as a small business because you are working with revenue, you are working with expenses, you are working with employment opportunities, getting paid to play. So you have to you apply a few small business strategies to your own art and be able to put on this hat and say, okay, my artist person is over there and now I'm a small business owner. And like, how do I maximize all of the financial opportunities that I can, you know, in a professional way where I don't feel like I'm sacrificing my soul or something. So think about how you can put that hat on and say, I'm a small business owner also, and how badass that is. And think about how you can manage your art in that way as well, not just the art. So today we're going to be talking about basic deal structures you're going to be running into. This is like in the DIY booking level, of course. So this is when you're booking yourself. So we're going to go over deal structures. Hopefully it makes sense. If you have any burning questions or confusions, you can hit up Ben in the chat and he will send pressing matters to me. Or, I'll answer them at the end. Speaking of, I need to put on this. Okay, cool. Do not disturb. Then we're going to go over how to read an offer sheet, which is very confusing. And I feel like they do this on purpose, but they typically all follow the same template. So if you understand the typical what you're going to be running into and what you need to be looking out for, then with time and experience, you will be able to read every single offer sheet easily. But it definitely takes time. Telling from myself, it takes a lot of time to understand an offer sheet fully, but just have faith in yourself. It really is a template. We're going to go over very small strategy in negotiating. This is typically about going into booking yourself and paying yourself, how to ask for money, stuff like that. And then we're going to go into some very basic financial management tips, not advice, about how to manage your small business, which is your band. So, again, let's go over some typical deal structures. Unfortunately, today involves math, which is what I was not put on this earth to do. I will tell you that. So, apologies if my math is bad, but this is something that you will have to do. Calculate. So, we're talking about deal structures. This is things that the venues, talent buyers will offer to you to play at their venue. So, a talent buyer is somebody that works in-house in the venue to with a budget, with a bunch of stuff coming from up top usually, but typically they have a budget that they're working with and curation that they're working with. And that's how they manage the programming and they buy talent. So they'll manage their budget and use it to offer bands deals. So venues have sometimes different options, and sometimes they have a pretty standard deal that they give to local bands or outside bookers. So just know that you're going to be running into a bunch of different situations, and knowing the difference between them is really helpful. So this is how the venue or promoter buys your talent. The most typical deal structure you'll run into is the door deal, right? So this is probably the thing that most of us have already seen before. You get a percentage cut of the door. Where that comes from and how that happens is a different story. And this is where you can look at A, B, and C. The number one is called a flat percentage. That's when you get, like, say, 60% of the door, no matter what. Cool. Or permanent records in LA, you get 100% of the door. No questions, period. That's called the gross box office receipt. And we'll go over the difference between GBOR and NBOR. Definitely take notes for this part. The B part is percentage after expenses. That's net box office receipt. That means that you get a cut of the door after certain expenses are covered. And typically that means the venue will cover the expenses from the door and you're not expected to pay that. That's called a room fee, rental fee. It's also sometimes called pay to play because you're going to have to pay them regardless of how the show does. So just think about where the expenses are coming from. We'll go over that in detail, but that's something to definitely consider when you're accepting an NBOR deal. And then another one that you might not see as often, but maybe for a festival with working with a promoter, working in a support slot for a bigger band, they may offer a percentage max dollars. So you get a, let's say like 10% of the door maxed at 150, which means that you'll get 10% of the door no matter what that is, but the maximum you can get is 150. So that's a very typical deal you'll see in support slots. Second most common deal you'll see is a guarantee. It's very, very common, flat offer. It can be anything from like $50 to thousands of dollars. So there really is no limit on the guarantee. And there is ways to negotiate and strategize getting guarantees. It's typically something you run into a little later in your DIY journey, but I'm going to go over that as well. So worry not. The third most common deal you'll get is a versus deal. That means that you're going to get a percentage versus a guarantee. Whichever one makes more, you'll get that one. We'll also go over this in detail. Number four, bonus percentage. It's a tiered percentage based on ticket sales. So let's say you have a base of 60% at 150 tickets. Once you get to 200 tickets, you could get 65% of the door. Once you get to 300 tickets, you could get 70% of the door, so on and so forth. And that incentivizes both the artist to bring more people in because you get a higher percentage, and also the venue because it means people stay at the bar and there's more people at the bar longer, which is their primary source of income. So we'll go over that as well. Just some couple notes before we move on, and you'll see this in the corner over here. Venues will usually send over an offer sheet if they're setting up a show. It has a lot of information on it. We'll go over it. But if they don't send an offer sheet, look at the email make sure they've said the words confirmed or cleared, and that will say that the show is good to go. If you don't see those words, I kind of mentioned this in the last workshop, but make sure that you're clarifying, is this confirmed? Are we good to go? Can we keep moving on this show? Because sometimes the wording is very not clear whether or not you got something. So look for that very clear words. At this phase, we'll also talk about when you can negotiate. You cannot negotiate once the show is confirmed. So we'll go over how you can kind of leverage some things during the booking process. Oops. Okay. We went over door deal pretty much very simple. I feel like, yeah, raise your hand in the chat or anything if this is not something you've run into before, but this is a very typical deal that most bands, especially when you're playing local shows, will get when you're first booking your first establishing runs on a DIY tour. These are most likely the deals that you will get because this kind of deal is beneficial to both parties. The venue doesn't take on as much of a risk by offering a guarantee. So if they don't know who you are, if you've never played in the venue or in the city before, and your numbers online don't necessarily reflect that, then this is the least risky deal they can offer. And they range everywhere from like 40% to 100%. So just think about how much percentage of the door you're getting and see if it works for you. Percentage after expenses, this one's a little more complex. Again, we'll go over it. But that means you get a percentage of the door after venue expenses, which can include a lot of stuff. And typically they'll send you a breakdown of what those expenses are. But that means you won't get that percentage cut until the door makes that money. So if the expenses for a venue are 300, that's called a split point. And after 300 is when you get that percentage. Before 300, they need to make that 300 so that you won't get any of that 300. If that makes sense. That covers a bunch of stuff, and that's called an NBOR deal. Percentage cap, we've talked about it. Pretty typical for support slots. Okay, this, I swear, I feel like something that I have to Google every 3 months because it's not easy to understand. Okay. GBOR is gross box office receipts. That means everything. Gross equals everything. Just remember that. That means you don't have to cover any of the expenses. That means you get a percentage of the door from $1, it's also called. You'll get all of the percentage that you've been allotted. So no expenses have to be covered from the door, and definitely not from your wallet up front or regardless of ticket sales. Then we have net box office receipts. Net equals after deductions. So that means that you get that percentage only after the venue's made back their money to cover their expenses. And that can range anywhere from $150 to pay the sound person to thousands of dollars because it's a huge room and there's a lot of staff involved, security, etc. So that is called the split point. That split point is the dollar amount expense that is where you will start to receive money after that. And that could be 100% after the split point, or that could be 70%, 60%, whatever they offer you after expenses, that's where it starts. If anyone's really confused, just sound off because this is really, oh, okay, the door. There's been questions about what the door is. That's a great question. The door is what venue people and booking people use to refer to as ticket sales. So if you're saying you get 60% of the door, that means you get 60% of all ticket sales, whatever comes through the door, basically. And that's only, there's different income sources of income from a venue. Sometimes they'll give you a cut of the bar if it's a free show. For example, like Zebulon in LA does, I think, 10 or 15% of the bar if it's a free show. So that would be 10% bar. This would be 60% door. And that's just to differentiate the different sources of income from the show. But you'll be typically working with door, and this is door deals. But thank you for asking that question. It's very good. So if that makes sense, basically the venue needs to cover their expenses. Really be clear where the expenses are coming from. If it's coming from the venue and you're not expected to pay this fee, then the venue will cover. If, for example, the venue's expenses are $500 and the show makes $501, you get 80% of that $1, if that makes sense. If the show is, if you have 80% after 500, the show makes $550, that you make 80% of $50. So it's after the venue has gotten their expenses covered. I hope that's clear. This is an example of a gross box office receipt deal. This gross means everything. So sometimes they're listed as a percentage from dollar one. Don't know why they say that. Because I mean, technically somebody had to pay $1 to get in at least. So percentage from dollar one is a way to list you get 70% of the door, no expenses. This is like a GBOR deal, GBOR deal. Then another way to say it is you get 100% of the door, period. $15 ticket, that can help you calculate how many tickets and how much money you can make. If you sell 50 tickets at $15 and you get 100% of that, then you can easily calculate how much you're going to make that night. This is an example of NBOR deal, okay? This is looks difficult, but it's actually you just gotta look for the numbers. So here we're seeing 80-20 ticket split bands venue. So that means that bands get 80% of the tickets after $320 cleared for in-house production. So that means that they have already cleared these expenses for the production. It's only for production. And 320 is what the venue needs to make back before you get 80% of the door. And that 320 is made from the door. And it's not pre-split. So that 20% that the venue gets of the tickets, that doesn't count towards their expenses. That's what they make after the expenses have already been made. 85% to artists, including support, also very important that I'll go over later, after 300 house costs and tax. So that's also something, some places will charge tax on top. Some places will do it to the consumer on the ticket. It really just depends, but you make sure to calculate that as well. But that means that basically you will get 85%, all the artists will get 85% of the door sales after $300 of house costs have been and tax have been made. Does that make sense? Is everyone following along? I hope so. Okay, another deal you'll run into. This is more common when you're doing support slots or dealing with promoters, but they'll offer you a percentage capped at a dollar amount. It's a fixed dollar amount, and the percentage is also fixed regardless if the show does really well or not. So, if you get 10% of the door capped at 100 and you know that this show with this huge band in a 4,000 capacity venue might sell out, you might want to ask for a little bit more of that pie, if you know what I mean, bigger slice. So that's something in negotiation we'll go over later. But this is typically how you'll see the deal written now. It'll be 15% capped at 250. This is an example, of course. My cat would like everyone to know that she has caught her blue mouse. That is a toy. Good job, Patty. Then it can also be written as 15% max 250. So that means it's the same, capped at max 250. The maximum you can make with 15% of the door is 250. So if that 15% of the door ends up being $1,000 because the show does really well, you'll still only get 250. You can negotiate this a little bit if you know, for example, I'm opening for a huge band and they're kind of doing me a favor, and I would love to see maybe 15% capped at 350, just so you get a little more of that slice if the show does really well. But typically there's not a lot of room for negotiation there. This means that they're cutting into their guarantee as the headliner to pay you a percentage of what they make. So it's already probably as tight as it can be. Sorry, this thing is backwards. Guarantee is another thing you'll run into. This is a flat fee. This is something you'll see more often for festivals, for support slots sometimes. We'll go over when you can start asking for guarantees and headlining, which is a strategic thing actually, and you can really play that to your advantage. It's best not to do it too early, and again, we'll go over that. But a flat fee is a fixed dollar amount. So if you get a $500 guarantee, that means you get $500 for playing the set regardless of how the show does. This is great. I mean, for an artist, it's really great because you know exactly how much money you're going to make for a show. For a venue, it can be a little more risky because you don't know if you're going to make that money. You're not sure unless you know from a venue you're buying talent that you've seen can draw that amount before, then you know that they can bring 500 or more worth tickets, then you can ask for a guarantee. And that's something, again, we'll go over later in some strategy. Sometimes you'll also see a plus deal which is a guarantee plus a percentage of the door, which is crazy. I mean, that typically happens if you're in a huge level and they can't pay you enough up front. So they give you like a good chunk up front, and then they say you can still have a majority of what we make at the door. Just please play. So that's something that you'll run into in the future, more likely, but that's called a plus deal. So I talked a little bit about strategy for guarantees and asking for guarantees. But there is a way to calculate this, and that's basically first you see how much money your band needs to play a show. Like, are you hiring any musicians? What are their rates? You know, do you have marketing or any kind of reoccurring cost like practice space that you need to throw some money towards? So see how much realistically the minimum that you could get away with playing. Most bands these days, I think you shouldn't ask for less than 150. Really, I mean, that just gives everybody a nice chunk. There's four people you have to split with, sometimes five, even more. And sometimes they treat the band as another member, so you have to split it five, another way anyway. So the more money you can get, I would really recommend, you know, if money is a priority for you, you should probably not take a gig that's less than 150 because it's very expensive to live and to pay your musicians and keep the morale up and have them feel like their time is worth it. And yeah, gas, practice space, there's so much that goes into rental equipment, everything. So just think about how much money you need to make it work minimum. And then how many tickets can you realistically sell? Like this whole thing, this whole workshop is about truly being honest with yourself about how many people you can bring out. And what does that do? That allows you to be really strategic with where you're playing and who you're playing with so you can get the best numbers. So really, truly, truly, truly be honest. How many people can you bring out? Like I know my ambient project, I've been doing it for a few years now, so I could probably bring out like 30 people. Let's call it 20 on a day because who knows? It could rain in Los Angeles and the whole city shuts down because it's sprinkling. Or, there could be another huge show that night that is a competition for me. So let's call it 10 less than what you would normally think. And that's how many tickets you could bring out. Give it an average cost of $15, and that's how much money you could bring to a show. That way you can start asking and be like, hey, I could bring $300 worth of people to the show. I think you could definitely pay me $300. That's how you kind of negotiate, but you do really have to be honest. And the issue with situations like this, asking for a guarantee too early. The show tanks for whatever reason. It's raining in LA and they still have to pay you $300 on top of their expenses. You're not going to get asked to play there again, unfortunately. They have lost that money, a lot of money, and they're probably going to be like, "Ooh, I'm going to wait and see until they can actually do that and then maybe invite them back in this room." But that the talent that you bought did not you didn't get what you paid for essentially as a talent buyer. And they look at it like that. So again, this is a small business, not your art that we're looking at. So just think about how you can strategically be truly honest. Even you can even undersell yourself. Be like, first time, yeah, I can breathe 300 people, and then you sell it out. Then they're gonna be like, oh my God, I'm gonna have them come every time. They're great. They bring a ton of people to the bar. They're not that expensive. I'm gonna hit them up all the time to play. Strategy. We'll go over more of that in detail later, but that's kind of how you know how much you can ask for. Oops. Okay, here's an example of a guaranteed deal. Very easy. The top one is a tour support offer. You're seeing dates, cities, venues, which will give you an idea of what the capacity is. They'll also sometimes include ticket sale prices, so you can see how much money you could make and if it's a good deal. But they're going to offer a flat rate guarantee for each show, and that's what you get pretty much. Sometimes there's a little wiggle room, but usually there isn't. This offer sheet down here, which is crazy, this is that rare plus percentage deal when you're on a larger level. Look at this, we're talking about $35,000 guarantee plus 85% of the gross after expenses. So I guess that's the net, but it's all relative to the rest of the deal, and I don't want to go into that. You won't run into that. But just wanted to show you an example of that rare beauty of the plus percentage deal right there. Okay, Okay, bonus percentage. Sometimes you'll see this if you are playing a local show and the venue doesn't want to take much of a risk, but they do want to incentivize you to get folks through the door. Maybe they know that you're a big party band and that folks love to drink during your set. You might not have the biggest draw, but folks will definitely be at the bar. So they will want to incentivize by giving you a tiered percentage based on amount of tickets that you sell. So let's say the base is at 60% at 150 tickets. So that's half capacity, let's say. You get 60% if you fill half the room. If you fill more than half the room, 250 tickets, you get 65%. And if you fill out 300 tickets, you sell it out, then you get 70% of the door or whatever the deal is. Sometimes that will be after the expenses, sometimes that will be without expenses. That's just something that you look out for. But not every venue does this. It's a really great deal to take if you can because it really truly incentivizes both parties and there's no risk involved for both parties. Everyone wins. It's the nicest deal you can get. Here is a bonus deal. The deal we have here is 60% of gross after hospitality. And it reverts to 65% of gross after hospitality at sellout. So if you sell out, you get 65% of the dorm. It's amazing. So when you see that number over there, we're going to go over how you calculate that. But that's showing you 65% of the door at sellout, what that would cost. And that's at the pre-sale price, at the advanced cost. We'll go over how to calculate that. There's a lot of math in this one, don't worry. The other one, but down here you'll see is another plus percentage. 60% plus 10%, so you could say it's 60% and then 70% at sellout. Artist pays promoter 10% capped. So here you're seeing that the support is inclusive, and here you're seeing a percentage cap deal. And also for the direct support, so the opener and the direct support. Also great distinction to make. Direct support is the person playing directly before the headliner. The opener is the first person playing in the night. So there could be one opener, support, direct support, headliner. It doesn't matter. It's just, there could also be 3 openers, a direct support, a headliner. It all depends. But that's telling you that you're in charge of paying the artist and this is the deal that you're giving them. I don't know why I keep doing this backwards. Sorry. Okay, this deal is an absolute mindfuck, but I wanted to show you it, not to get any more confusing. But you might see this. This is a deal I actually got in Los Angeles. So the guarantee, which is already confusing, is 50% is versus 50% of the box office after the fees, up to 250 tickets, then it goes back to 60% from net, from $1. So that's no deductions. If you sell 250 tickets, the deal converts to a percentage with no deductions. So it goes to an NBOR deal. If you sell 350, then you get a higher percentage NBOR deal to $1. If anyone wants to talk about how nerdy this is with me after, but this is kind of how you need to break down the numbers. Sorry, I keep doing this backwards. Versus deal. You'll sometimes see this as well in the larger venues in town, and I'm sure wherever everyone is from. But this will give you 2 options for profit, and typically it's a good deal. The 1 is a guarantee, so no matter what, you're going to make X amount of money. The 2 is a percentage deal after or before expenses. So that could be an option of whichever one makes the most money is the one that you get. So let's say that you get a $1,000 guarantee versus 85% of the door gross. So you don't have to cover any of the expenses. That means that if $1,000 is more than what 85% of the door makes, then you keep the $1,000. But if 85% of the door is more than $1,000, then you get to keep 85% of the door. So it also is an incentive to be like, well, you're going to get paid this flat amount no matter what. But if you happen to do really well and sell the show out, you'll get even more money. It's a really great deal. This is an example of a versus deal. You have a 1,200 guarantee versus 90% after expenses. So noting that that's 90% after expenses. If that's more than 1,200, you get to keep that. If 1,200 is more than that, then you get to keep the 1,200. Same with the bottom one here, 85% of the box office receipts. And that's a 50% to the artist of anything earned after that. So they get 85% or 50% of the back end. Okay, now what? We're going to go look in depth at an offer sheet. Does anyone have any questions right now? before we continue? Burning questions for Ben, clarifications. We're going to have question time at the end. I will answer your more specific things there, but if anyone needs me to clarify anything.
Can I jump in with some of the
Mhm.
questions from the two questions that I think are worth discussing? First of all, can we define the back end? And
Mm.
also the sort of mind fuck of like X percentage of GBOR after hospitality, because that's
Yeah.
kind of net.
Yes. That's kind of net, and that is a really good point. You're not going to run into that as often. Really, it's it's a relative term, unfortunately. I'm kind of trying to like 101 simplify this to some things that you'll run into more often, but it is relative. So like you can have a gross after hospitality because hospitality is technically for some venues it's not considered a mandatory expense. So it's something that you could have if you wanted, or you can just opt to not have hospitality and they'll just give you that flat percentage GBOR deal. So it's still gross for that sense. If you're looking at other expenses for production, that is not optional, and unfortunately, that shouldn't be counted as a gross. It should be still in the net expense zone. So I hope that helps clarify that. You're typically going to be running into way more cookie cutter situations, but if you do see gross after hospitality or after expenses, just make sure you're clarifying those expenses are the ones that are for the artist and not for the venue. And then the back end, that is, oof, that's a whole other thing that I'm going to go into in the next one, actually, for booking tours, because it has to do a lot with negotiating. And that's kind of the back end is what the venue gets. So we'll go over that and how to leverage that in the next session. But don't worry about that too much for this one. Sorry. Okay, now what? I'm sick. My brain is overflowing with terms and deals. I need to see an offer sheet. Let's look at an offer sheet. It's confusing on purpose, I swear. Okay, this is what you will run into, like the typical categories that you'll see in your average offer sheet. This is the template. This information should be provided on the offer sheet. Otherwise, it's not really a complete offer sheet, if you will. So the first thing, of course, you'll see venue info, date of show. Sometimes the event has a name, like if it's a festival or a showcase or like a specific curated event. So that will be on there as well. The band that the offer is for, if you're a promoter or an organizer, you'll see multiple names on there so that the offer encapsulates all the bands that the venue is buying. You'll see ticket prices. They'll be listed in different ways. I'll go over that in detail. But that will help you calculate how much money you could make. Deal terms, slash also known as artist's deal, that we'll go over in detail for sure, but that will help you understand, all those different deal structures that we just went over. Show expenses, really important. Sometimes they'll be listed as one number. Sometimes they'll be listed as a whole list with an amount per listing, per item that shows you how much money is going to everything. We'll go over that again too. Merch terms. Venues all over the country are stealing your merch percentages just for the honor of being able to sell in their wedded halls. So we'll go over all the different merch terms that venues can offer. Sometimes they'll have a notes section that will give you some more details about that, travel is or isn't included, whether the support is included or not, all this stuff. Same with radius might be in the notes as well. That's a restriction on when and where you can play. That's part of the contract, so we'll go over. It's super important, radius. It's not something that they really stress or teach you, so pay attention to number 9. And walkout potential is when you have to do the maths, the big, big maths time. So we'll go over everything. This is like a blank, typical offer sheet. You see here, this will come up a few times in this workshop, so don't freak out if I'm moving too fast. But you'll see here it has, in the top corner, information about the venue, the show, people involved with the contract, basically. Then you have the headliner, all the support, what time they have to be there. Sometimes it will also include set time. That's also part of the contract. So if you played 25 minutes and your set was 30 minutes, that could jeopardize your pay. So we'll go over that as well. That's part of the contract. Venue information, headline information. Here you have a list in the bottom corner, bottom left corner, fixed expenses. So you'll see all the different kind of expenses that a venue needs to run, and there's so many more, of course. But this is the typical things that they'll disclose to you to say, this is what we need to make one production work. And then you'll see over here on the right, ticket sales. You've got capacity, which will help you calculate how many tickets you could sell. You'll go over tax deductions as well. We'll briefly go over that. And then a deal summary in the bottom, which is really what you need to be looking for the real information. So going into depth now. Show info, you've got the venue name, the date that the contract or the offer sheet is issued. You've got the event date. Make sure that the event date is on there. Sometimes venues will put TBA or TBD on there to be lazy, I guess, or like have flexibility on there, and make sure that it says the date. That's part of the contract too. Band names. Sometimes it only says the headliner. Sometimes it says the whole lineup if you're the organizer. Sometimes it's just for your band to open for another band. So it's just for whoever it's relevant for. Event name, if that's also relevant, will be there. And age requirement. Note if it's 21 plus for marketing reasons as well. A lot of people, you get better deals with 21 plus because again, the venues, their primary source of income these days is bar sales. So they want drinking age folks in there, of course. So those will typically be the best deals, but you can open it up and not alienate those underage, not, sorry, I don't mean to sound creepy, like the not 21 age, 18 plus, or even all age crowds that you can tap into. Like if your music is listened to by a bunch of high schoolers, then you got to do that all ages show. Typically that means a different deal. That usually means kind of a worse deal, but it does open up the room to other people and they take on that liability. So it's worth it for some people, definitely. And that's something that you can think about what your audience is and what kind of rooms you need to be playing in. If you have a young audience, maybe playing exclusively in bars might not be the best way to get to them. So it is very relevant. Ticket prices. These are typically listed as advance or day of show. Advance is often mistakenly called pre-sale. I call it pre-sale all the time too because it just sounds more fun. But that is a different thing, and I'll go over what pre-sale actually is. Advance is the price that you can buy ahead of time online and not at the door the day of the show. And typically they have a price difference between the two of I would say at least $3. Make sure that the fees, don't put if your show is $12 and if your advance is $12 and your door is 14, but the fees are 250, that means that your advance ticket's going to be 1450 and your day of ticket is 14. So do you think people are going to want to pay 50 cents extra just to get it ahead of time? Maybe not. Maybe they will. So just something to think about. Make sure that that difference in ticket price is big enough. And that is something that you can set yourself. That's right. Believe it or not, you have power over the ticket price. You can make that as part of your negotiation. You can make that as part of your deal. In fact, most agents, when they're pitching to a show, to a room, to a venue, they'll be like, we these are the bands, we want this deal and we want this ticket price. And they'll usually be like, okay, or no, we can't make that work. So having the ticket price in mind is really important. Research what the typical average ticket price at that venue is. Research how many tickets you've been able to sell at that ticket price before. If your typical crowd is used to paying $10 or going to a free show, are you going to be able to charge $20 entry at a bigger venue to help make that money back? Maybe not. So be realistic with yourself. What does your crowd like? How much are they willing to pay? And you can set that ticket price as part of the deal. You'll also see gross capacity, which is the total sellable tickets, crucial for the math. And it's not always the same as the venue capacity. Sometimes venues can expand or retract based on capacity. So they can have a 250 option or a 350 option. They can move the stage back. They have another room that they can expand into. So just remember, it's not always the same as the venue capacity. It is sellable tickets for this show. Very different, crucial distinction to make. Gross potential is how you'll do the math. So this is the worst of the best case scenarios. You're going to calculate the potential walkout with a sellout. So your full capacity sell at the pre-sale cost. So let's say the worst of the best case scenario is that everybody buys pre-sales and the show advance tickets and the show sells out in advance and there's no tickets left at the door. So that's kind of what they prepare for. Obviously, it would be great if it sells out night of because that's more money. But again, They plan for the worst of the best case scenarios. So that's what the gross potential is. It's also what the walkout potential is, and we'll go over that. Comps, super important. This is something that I have to deal with a lot as a promoter, I'll be honest. Comps are part of the contract. They'll put a certain amount of comps, which is guest list spots, per show. And that's, sometimes per band, sometimes it's for the whole band as part for the whole show as part of the contract. So sometimes you'll see, for example, over here, you'll see 100 comps out of 2,100 available tickets. So that means that sellable is 2,000 because that 100 comps is out of there. That 100 comps is probably for all the bands. That includes, crew, that includes media people, PR, people that you need to come to the show. So you typically won't see 100. You're probably going to see more like 15 per show. And that means that all bands have to share 15 guest list spots, and that is 100% part of the contract. So a promoter can get in trouble if the bands are asking for more guest list spots, comps, than have been allotted to the show. So a lot of times I have to ask people to cut down their lists. I've told them in advance, there's 3 bands, each one gets 5. Or there's 3 bands. One is the clear headliner. It's their album release show. They get 10, and the 2 other bands get to split 5. So just think about that's also important to respect. Advance. If advance is not pre-sale, then what is pre-sale? Pre-sale is another way to tier tickets. You've probably seen this before with like pop stars and stuff. They'll have if you're part of the fan club, you'll get a special code and you can buy the tickets 3 days in advance instead of 2. So there's ways to tier that, and you can work with the venue to tier it. They have the ability to do that. So you don't have to be a huge pop star to have that. If you have a very dedicated fan base, you can reward them by giving them an even earlier access and maybe even a discount to your show. So definitely something that you can think about when you are deciding ticket price, ticket tiers, and when you're negotiating your deal. Here you'll see the third picture, ticket price 17.22. That's a $5 difference. That probably covers expense fees and then some, so that is an incentive to buy it earlier. And then you can see, again, gross, we're calculating 500 sellable capacity at the pre-sale, at the advance cost. That's the worst of the best case scenarios, right? So we're going to calculate 500 tickets at $17. That's 8,500 gross potential, walk-up potential. We'll go over that too. Deal terms. This is super important. I mean, this is typically super wordy, full of numbers, and really confusing, but it is the most important part of the deal. That's just how they do it. So this is an example over here on the left of what deal terms might look like. You're going to have set length that is presumed that is part of the contract. So 45 to 60 minutes for that money. That's part of the contract. That's what they're buying. They're buying a 45 to 60 minute set for that deal, right? The offer is exclusive. This is a radius clause, radius restriction. We're going to go over more in detail what that is, but it's really important to note the radius restrictions, and that'll typically be the second or third thing in the deal. Comps, right here, you see right there, 15 comps to headliner, 5 each support. Very clear how much you get. Please respect that. Mutually agreeable support, that means that everyone has to agree on the support. That's part of the deal. The venue and the bands all have to agree on who gets added to the show. Makes sense. Offer is inclusive of support talent. That means that the artist is required to pay the support. That means it's inclusive. So I have to pay the support artist from my cut. So whatever deal I get, it's inclusive. Sometimes they'll expense the artist. So let's say they set aside $100 for support and they put that as part of their expenses on the venue end. So you're not in charge of paying out the artist, but it is part of that split point before you get your money. So eventually you do have to pay them in some way or another, but it depends if you're in charge of doing it or if the venue is in charge of doing it. You're also sometimes places require you to use their in-house sound and lights, so you can't bring your own stuff. No catering budget means there's no hospitality budget. If the hospitality budget is the one there, then ask why you're getting 2 drink tickets and still getting charged for hospitality. If there's green room stuff or what you need to know. If you're getting just drink tickets, you shouldn't be charged for hospitality. That should be on the venue. So just something to look out for. Backline, also noted typically in the deal terms. Sometimes, especially for festivals, they'll require you to use their backline to make changeovers quicker. Sometimes they won't have any backline and you'll have to be in charge of setting that up on your own. So that will be on the deal terms as well. And they won't be in charge of the costs if you have to do it yourself. That will be your cost. We have information about no travel accommodations or loading help will be available. So that means no stagehands will be there to help you out because that's another cost. The lighting, being able to use the lighting board because they typically have to have a certification and a bunch of other stuff that costs money typically. Filming and recording. It will give you all this information. I mean, I will also give you an expiration date on the offer. So if you don't accept the offer, it will eventually expire. Radius is really important. I think we go over it in detail later, actually. So I'll go over that later, actually. Expenses. Ooh, this is also sometimes listed as a house nut, which is hilarious. But sometimes it's also listed as a list. And you'll see here the two on the left, two examples of how this can happen. In this top one, the venue has listed all their expenses as one number. And you're like, okay, cool. I mean, I'm sure that makes sense. Underneath, you'll see the venue listing each expense out. So that can kind of help you see where those expenses are going to, making sure that, for example, there's no rentals that you didn't agree to. If the marketing budget is $500, be like, where's that going to? I would love to see your network. Where do you send your marketing stuff? Do you have, paid outlets that you need to be using this money towards? I want to see your marketing budget. That's totally kosher to ask. Of course, be respectful. But if it's an astronomical number, like more than 250, 300, then definitely ask for it. Anything under 300 is pretty typical. It kind of sucks that the venue puts that marketing expense on you, but it's how they can ensure that people get there. And if you've played at a venue before and they didn't promote your show at all and they charged you $300 for marketing, then maybe don't play there again. Something to keep an eye out too, because they're not using that marketing budget as they should. Hospitality is typically also an optional thing. So, like I said, sometimes it can be included in a gross deal because it is optional. You can ask for a meal or cash buyout instead, usually, but that means that you don't get anything in the green room, like no water, drinks, snacks, nothing. And you just get that $25 cash or whatever they deem is equivalent to a hummus plate, and you can run away with that. So, it's definitely a way to get more money on tour. Or if you're playing at home, you can just feed yourself. Promoter sometimes is a fixed expense with the venue. If they're working with a promoter, for example, for a festival, sometimes the promoter will just have a fixed expense. It's part of the NBOR deal. So this is where you need to pay attention because sometimes promoters also take a percentage cut, and we'll go over promoters. Gosh, how much time do we have left? Not that much time. We'll go over that in detail, but promoters typically take a percentage cut off the top. So if they're taking a percentage cut and they're asking for an expense, that means they're getting paid twice. So keep an eye out for that. Make sure that the deal you have with the promoter is the same deal that the promoter has with the venue. Unfortunately, it happens quite a bit. On other expenses, this is mostly for touring artists and international artists, but really quickly going over tax stuff. If you're playing in your home state, that means the state that matches your W-9 residential address, and you're playing for under $1,500, you don't have to, the venue will not withhold tax. So the venue doesn't have to pay tax on that. If you're playing, yep, admitting these folks. Oops, whoa, what happened? Okay, if you're playing out of your state and you're getting paid more than $1,500, you're going to get charged your state tax, right? State tax that you're playing in. So say that you're from Washington and you're playing in California. The venue will withhold 7% California tax, and that's typically listed on an expense as out of state tax withholding. That means that the venue takes care of that already. So it's over $1,500 out of your state. You get charged that state that you're playing in's tax. Now, this is where it gets freakier. If you're playing out of your country in the US, say you're a Canadian or from Europe, and you're playing in the US, that means that not only are you going to get charged a state tax per state that you're playing in per show, but you're also going to get charged a federal withholding tax. And it's not charged, I guess. The venue will withhold it. So you'll get this amount less. You're not being charged this. I should differentiate that. So that will be stacked, unfortunately. You will be with the venue will be withholding 37% federal and state tax. And that, of course, varies based on the state. Washington, I think, is less, obviously. So say it's 5%, then you would be doing 35% if you play in Washington. So when you're planning a tour and managing your finances, this is something that you need to make a note of for sure, because it will mean less money coming to you than you expected. It's part of the expenses. International artists, when you're booking through agents or US labels, they can apply for you through the IRS for a form. It's called 8233, Form 8233. And it can help you be exempt from central withholding. That's the federal withholding. So you could not get charged that or withheld that 30% federal income tax because the venue is essentially saying, we are hiring them to come play this. So they don't, we'll take care of the federal income tax on our end. They don't have to pay that, basically. And that means that it's not going to be withheld. So look into that for sure if you're thinking of coming to the US because it can save you a lot of money. Again, I'm not a financial expert, so please don't sue me if it doesn't work for you. This is just like from my experience hiring international artists. So again, we're looking at the sheet here. Take a screenshot if you want. This is all the things you'll look at without the numbers, so it can be less confusing. But this is your typical offer sheet. This is what you'll see. Merch terms, really quick. Most places that are cool will give you 100% of all your merch. A lot of places that are less cool, they're not doing that anymore. They're taking a percentage of your merch for the honor of being able to sell it in their venue. So it's important to note the two different kinds of merch that venues differentiate from. The first is soft goods. That means anything that's non-recorded merchandise. Shirts, hats, totes, wearable items. Nothing that's CD recorded. Hard goods, that's what's recorded. You got vinyl, CDs, tapes, anything that's music related recorded, right? So they'll have different terms for both soft goods and hard goods. The fact that they even take a percentage is fucking mind-blowing to me, but for some reason that's become the norm. So you will run into this, unfortunately. When it says artist, right here, you can see artist, artist. That means the artist is expected to sell the merch. That means the opposite would be venue. Venue sells or buyer sells. That means that the venue will be in charge of selling your merchandise, typically for a cut or a promoter or sorry, or a flat fee for their seller. So they'll be like, hey, we're gonna take 90% of your soft goods and you're required to pay our merch seller $150 to sell the merch. Otherwise, you can't sell merch in our venue. And you'll run into that sometimes, especially in the larger like theaters that are corporate owned. So definitely keep an eye out for that and get ready to lie your ass off. Radius, really quick. This is super important and it is part of the contract. This is also known as a radius clause, a radius restriction, or an offer exclusive. This means that there is a time limit on when you can play within the area. Sometimes that time limit also means when you can announce shows in the area. So if you're playing a show on March 15th and another show, let's say 30 days later, or whatever, March or April 20th, you still can't sometimes announce that April 20th show until the March 15th one is done. So sometimes they'll give you that restriction of announcement, being like, you can't announce this show until after this show is done. But that show might be right within the window if you need to be. So the bigger window you can put in between each show that's local or in the same area, the better, because that will not cannibalize tickets. And we talked about this a little bit on the DIY booking workshop last week. But cannibalizing tickets is basically like, if you're playing in your hometown 3 shows in the same month, and one is $12, one is free, and one is $30 because it's a festival, which one do you think your audience is going to go to? They're going to say, oh, I could go to this show that's $12, but I can see them for free next week, so I'll just go to that one. And then someone will be like, well, I don't want to see them twice. I want to see them with this festival, so I'll pay $30 and not go to the other shows. So you're spreading out your audience, you're cannibalizing your own tickets. So best to spread out those shows in the same area as much as possible. They will also not just be good strategy, but be part of your contract. So if you violate this part of the contract, it's more than enough to cancel the show. I've had to cancel a show myself when the headliner took on another headlining show like within the same weekend. And that is not what the venue bought the talent for. The venue bought the talent to play a headlining show, an exclusive headlining show that weekend. And everyone's going to come out to that one because it's the only one they have. So by booking that second headlining show, they're spreading their audience, they're violating our contract, and nobody wins. So we had to cancel that first show anyway. And that means that the second show got all the tickets, which sucked. But that's how it should be. So definitely something to think about. This is how they'll be listed typically on offers. Exclusive 30 radius 30 miles, no shows announced in radius until after the show. No performance within radius for 30 days prior. Sometimes they'll give you exactly how much the radius is. Sometimes, like for Coachella, the radius is like 100 miles. So you can't even play LA if you're playing Coachella. But they'll tell you sometimes it's just within the area, which you can, you know, it's vague on purpose. You can play with that. Walkout potential, we talked about this a little bit, but this is again the worst of the best case scenario. So this is, you're going to be calculating. You need to calculate how much money you could make if you sell out the show all advanced. So that would be like the least most amount of money that you could make, that the venue could make. So you're going to be calculating, for example, if the venue is 300 cap and the advanced tickets are 15, and the deal is you get 100% of the door, that's 100% GBOR, gross. The walkout potential is you could make $4,500 if you sell out that 300 cap at advance. Now, let's say the day of price is more, it's $2 more, then you can make more money. But this is what you would make the minimum if you sell it out. And this is what the venue likes to see if the show makes sense and if it's worth it. And you can also use this exact same formula and this exact same approach to see if it's worth it for you, for your money and your time. So, really quick, just some basic strategy stuff right here. Again, take a screenshot of this. This is the typical deals that you will be running into. Very broken down, very easy. Again, in California, at least, an email is considered contract. So just make sure that the offer sheet and the email match up because if they're not, you can definitely ask them to adjust accordingly. Bigger picture, this is where negotiation can happen. When you're reaching out to a venue, you've placed holds, and before you're ready to challenge holds, you say, this is the lineup I've got. I would love to look at this date. What do you think about giving me instead 80% because this band is huge, and they need a little more money, or they'll definitely sell it out, and be honest because you can, if you're not honest and you mess it up, they're not going to want to do business with you again. So be truly honest with yourself and maybe even undersell. And that way you can get your foot in the door and they feel like it's a negotiation and not just like an entitled person asking for money. It's like you will also win with this because X, X, and X. After the holds have been challenged and you're ready to confirm the show and they're going to send you an offer sheet, this is where you can do some light negotiation. Once the show is confirmed, absolutely no negotiation. Like if you got a shitty deal and you said, I get a 400 guarantee and the show sells out and the venue made like $10,000, you can't go back and be like, hey, I know we agreed on $400, but like the show sold out. So like, can't I get some more of that money? The venue's going to be like, fuck no, go away. So just think about how these two are pretty much the only locations in this process of booking yourself where you can negotiate. Before or after, it's really not worth it. You can, when you're pitching the show, talk about ticket price, how much money you'd like to see. Once you get some more draw and you know what you can sell to the talent buyer. This is something that happens all the time too. I talked about this a little bit in the DIY booking workshop last week, but headlining too soon is like a death wish because again, you're telling the venue that you can sell out this room, right? And they're planning accordingly, financially, marketing wise, and then you don't sell it out. They're probably not going to want to invite you back. They're probably not going to want to work with you again just because that business deal wasn't really like what they didn't get what they paid for, if that makes sense. The same goes for playing shorter sets than you were required to, longer sets than you were required to. These are all things that kind of put a bad taste in their mouth. And they'll say, we don't want them headlining, we don't want them in here. Let's wait until they grow a little more and then they can get back in. So it's way better, and please tattoo this under your arm. It's way better to oversell a small capacity room than it is to undersell a large capacity room. So if you're like, I could get 80 people out for sure. Wouldn't it be better to sell out a 100 capacity room and have it feel really tight and have all that marketing of like sold out, then the venue's like, yeah, we get a bunch of money. Than trying to go into a 150 capacity room and like half selling it or really heavily relying on the support to sell it. That doesn't give your band value. That doesn't give your band draw. That just kind of diffuses the burden onto other bands to get folks out. So see how much you yourself can bring. Be honest and book accordingly, because even now, pop stars are doing like small, intimate 3 nights in a row shows because the deals are better, they make more money, and if they need to do 2 nights, they can. And that can be a special occasion. But it's better to oversell a small capacity room than to undersell a large capacity room. What does that also do then? You can go to another venue in town and be like, hey, we just sold out this 100 capacity room. We could totally do well in your 150 capacity room, and you kind of slowly build up that way, and that will also create more opportunities for more money. So the more data you have, the better. And again, emphasizing oversell that small room because that optics wise looks great and a venue will invite you back anytime. Working with promoters, we kind of talked about this earlier. Promoters are independent booking people, or sometimes they don't book, they just promote. But they're folks that tap into their network to market the show. That means they have sometimes publications or radio spots or blog spots or whatever that help get word out about the show, and that's what you're paying them for. If a promoter, you can pay them to book the show, and that's totally fine because sometimes they act as a booker. For me myself, I'm primarily a booking agent. I really don't like promoting stuff. It makes stresses me out and makes me break out in hives. And I feel like people can pay me to connect the dots for them and coordinate the show, and that's totally fair. There's folks that don't coordinate the show at all, and they've got an incredible network that gets folks out, and you can pay them for that too. So just be honest about what the promoter's role is and what they're getting paid for. Typically, you'll see a 10% off the top fee. That means that 10% of whatever the door makes before it's split into the bands. Because they organize the whole show, they organize all the bands, so they need a cut from all the bands. If it's just your booking agent, they'll take a 10% cut from your cut only. So again, something else to talk about. If you're working with a promoter, be like, is your cut coming from just mine or from all the whole door, from all the bands? Sometimes a promoter will ask for a fee up front, and they'll say that this is for marketing. They'll say that this is to pay their graphic designer for the flyer. There might be some infrastructure they need to pay for, like their email list subscription fee or whatever. That doesn't always work for people, right? Because that's a lot of money. Typically, they'll ask for like $300 to $500 at least just to market the show. And that's a lot of money up front that they're asking for. So it might not work for everybody. For me, I tend to work exclusively with promoters and booking agents that only take a flat percentage fee because it's incentive for everybody to do well. Nobody's getting paid up front. So I think for me, I would kind of stick more towards that. And you can politely ask what their budget is for, but it is kind of sketchy sometimes. I've seen a lot of people get ripped off. Contracts, really quickly going to go over this. This is really important to get paid, not just from promoters and venues, but also from bandmates. So say you're a for-hire musician. This is very relevant to a lot of people, I'm sure. But you want to make sure that you're getting paid and for how many shows and for a rate. And it's totally kosher to send a very basic contract over to the person hiring you for those gigs. It will just very briefly detail what the terms of your agreements are and how much you're going to get paid and how you're going to get paid and when you're going to get paid. So don't be afraid to do this. Don't be afraid to ask. And I'll include this as one of the resources. You can take a screenshot. But this is like a little one that I just really quickly made. And this is all the information that I would want to confirm with my employer, the band or whatever that I'm getting. So the dates of engagement, how many shows am I playing? What role? Am I a bass player? Am I a tour manager? Am I a bass player and merch? How many roles am I doing? Am I getting paid for? Sometimes you have to wear multiple hats on tour, so you would note that there. Guarantee or fee per show, if that's a flat fee or a percentage of the earnings, you want to make sure that's noted. Number of shows, total fee that you're expected to make based on those number of shows. Then you're going to detail the shows. Then you're going to say payment to be sent net 30. That's already kind of a ripoff, honestly. It should be sent net 10, but that's when you can get kind of mad at them. If it's been a month and they haven't paid you, then that's really, in any other industry, that would be fucked up. So you can definitely put net 30 in there. You can put net 10 in there if you really want to. And that means that your payment has to be sent within 10 or 30 days. The net means within that many days. So if they get the shows, they need to be paid net 30. That means you need to be paid within 30 days of the shows. You're also going to put your payment info in there, so it's real easy. Multiple sources of payment if they need to. Zelle, PayPal, I just give them as many options as possible because, international wiring as well. Include the wiring information if you need to. Give them as many options as possible because then they won't have many excuses left for why they can't pay you on time. And of course, if you are getting paid over 600, you need to include a W-8. And if you're a W-9, and if you're international, a W-8. And then have everyone sign it. That's it. Math. Oh my gosh. I feel like this is not something that is this 1500 single show? Oh, also important to know how much you get paid for a whole tour or one show. Like somebody had a question about that earlier. That should be very clearly written, like fee per show or fee for the tour. So there shouldn't be much confusion there on the offer sheets. It should be very clear. This math, does this deal work for you? This is a deal from LA. It's 80% of the door after expenses, which look like it's 300 expenses because the gross ticket income is 1900 and the net income is 1600. So yeah, we can see that there's $304 of expenses. 80% of 300 of that 1600 is what the net income that the artist would get. So 80% of 1600 is 960, I believe it should be. And that's how much you could make with a deal. Now you're going to look over here, capacity. Okay, so I'm looking at 160 tickets capacity, right? And they're charging $1.90 in fees, so the ticket's actually $10. So I could sell 10 $10 a ticket for 160 tickets and make that money. Can I do that? Can I sell 160 tickets of $10 to make that money? How much can I sell if not? And how much would that make me? Do I need to split that with other artists or are they going to pay out the artists? These are all things that you need to calculate when you do the maths because this will give you a good idea of what the show could make if you sell it out. So you really should be emphasizing on selling out shows and playing rooms that you can sell out. Not just for optics, but for money. Here's an example again. If the venue is 100 capacity and has 500 expenses, and you get 50% of the door after 500, this is how many tickets. You'd have to sell 33 tickets at 15, which might be high for some people already, right? Does your audience want to come to a $15 your band show? Something to think about. Can you sell $33 at that price to cover just the expenses? Just to cover that, and then after that, you get 50% of whatever the door makes. So that leaves 67 tickets out of the 100 capacity, right? And if you sell them all at the advance, that's 1,000 and you get 50% of that. So again, you only get 500. Does that work for you for selling out a 100 capacity room? Does 500 expenses seem like a lot for a 100 capacity room? How many security guards do they have to hire? How much is the sound person getting paid? All these things, is the marketing budget like astronomical? These are all things you need to look at. Same with 250 capacity. You can just take a screenshot of this. They're just examples of math that you might want to run through your head to see if a deal works for you. And again, you can politely decline a deal. That's totally fine. You have by no means are required to accept what they give you straight up. You can try negotiating, you can try wiggle room, and if it doesn't work, then go play somewhere else. But don't take something that doesn't work for you, knowing all this data, because there are other opportunities. Some basic financial tips really quick. Have a separate bank account for your band. This helps you keep track of a bunch of stuff. It can help you can then expense all your, gas, travel, practice space, gear, everything. Again, you can make an expense report for that separate bank account, but you need to have it separate. It's way cleaner for taxes. It's way easier for you to keep track of. And then you don't have to put your own personal money at risk when you are touring or when you're playing. Register your music. Oh my gosh. I like didn't do this until last year. Register ASCAP and BMI. Just look it up. It's really easy. I think there's like a small fee for BMI. ASCAP is free. And it will pay you for getting your music played on radio, on playlists, on like if coffee shops have playlists that they need to play, they pay for that stuff. Radios pay for that stuff, pay to play. So you can get that money. You can get that money. You just need to register your music so they can connect the dots for you. Mm. Merch is really important for obviously making money on the road, but also like keeping good track of merch is super important to have a better idea of how much money you're actually making. Inventory is really important. Don't, and it's hard, but don't give away all your merch to your friends. Like make it accessible pricing if you're worried about that and just want to, break even. But it's definitely a really important source of income, especially on tour when you're getting sometimes $100, $150 guarantees. You're playing massive rooms. The biggest source of your income will be selling merch to all those people, right? So have as many outlets as possible, PayPal, Cash, Venmo, Zelle, like give them every single option possible. Credit card, Square readers, you can make a Square account for free, get the reader for free or something. Like it's it's real easy and I definitely recommend getting that sorted sooner than later. Contracts, make sure you're getting paid, period, on time and the amount that you were promised. So contracts, get that template ready for yourself and then just have it, you adjust a few words here and there per gig and you have your template done. Prepare for a rainy day kind of has to do with budgeting when you're touring. We'll go over this next week more in depth, but you kind of need like 500 a day just in case you make no money. You have to pay for gas, pay for your bandmates, and pay for the hotel that night. So that's like the worst case scenario. If you can have a few of those rainy days saved up before a tour, have 1,000 or 1,500 saved up, really crucial and will put you in a much better position to go into it. It sucks because you have to kind of like save up to tour, obviously, but it is a smart financial practice. Some distros and labels will advance money for you. Some booking agents will also advance money from the venue. Say you get a guarantee, they'll be like, okay, we want 20% of that guarantee up front, and they could send you that money sometimes. Definitely ask, it's a possibility. And if you're international, again, talk to your label or your US representatives. I'm not like in the Senate or anything, but like the people that represent you in the US. And talk to them about getting that form filled out so you can be exempt. Sometimes the venues will do that if you're like hired to come play a festival in New York, one off, they'll do that for you typically. But if you're doing like a whole tour or several shows, get all those forms already ready to go so you just hand them to the venue. In conclusion, I was not put on this earth for math, but if I can do it, so can you. That's it. I hate all of this so much. And it's so stressful and so confusing. So if you are just reeling right now, I'm right there with you. We'll have the next 40 minutes to answer questions, but take a screenshot of your homework, please. Obviously, this is not mandatory, but these are things I recommend you getting sorted sooner than later and integrating into your booking slash financing practice sooner than later, because they're kind of pillars for running your art as a small business as well. So, oh my gosh. Oh, I think my logic is on with reverb and I keep hearing my voice. Anyway, I'm sorry if that's been coming through the Zoom this whole time. Wow. That's it. Here are some links. We'll also include the website. It's mostly just signing up for UMAW, which is as close to a union as musicians can get since we're independent contractors. So definitely look into them. And Rising Artists Foundation, helping folks get grants, constantly working on getting folks, even health insurance and all these things. So great organizations to be a part of and involved with, and everybody that's involved in these organizations are always down to help each other. So it's really just a lovely community to be a part of, and please consider signing up for them. Here's also a link to the Office Hours series. And again, I'll share these links later, but that's the whole series we've been doing. And the contract and offer template, we'll share those big time so that you can make your own. Thank you. Go book yourself.